So we're talking about the bride coming down the aisle and whether you should track or not track. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to refer to tracking as servo mode or tracking, and I will refer to not tracking as single shot. Different camera systems use different terminology for this, so I'm going to say either tracking or single shot. I'll probably refer to it like that so you know what I'm talking about. There's a couple of things that really matter and make the difference here. First one being the aperture that we're using, and the second one is the performance of our camera. And I could add on a third point to that as well, which is preference, but I'll come on to that. So the first one with aperture is that if I'm shooting at f1.2 or 1.4, if I use single shot, I can frame the couple, the bride in the middle of the frame. But if I want to get a different crop, I have to either move the focus point or focus and recompose and shoot. Yeah? The problem with that is that in the moment when I focus, then I recompose, the bride is still moving. So let's say my depth of field is like this. I have to focus, recompose, get steady and shoot very, very quickly. It's not that hard to do, but what I need is depth of field, because if I'm at 1.2, I've got a razor thin depth of field. If I focus and recompose, shoot, in that half a second, she's moved through my plane of focus and she's not going to be in focus. However, if I was to shoot that at f4, I would probably get away with that. You have to remember that when the bride comes down the aisle, she's not moving fast. She's not even going at the normal walking speed. She's probably walking at about 1 mile an hour, maybe 1.5, but it's slow. She's not walking quickly. We're not having to track someone that would be maybe a sports event. So we don't need to have tracking on specifically, but we have to be aware that if we're not going to track, we're probably going to need more depth of field. Unless we're keeping her in the center of the frame and just shooting with them in the center, or if we can move our focus points around. Now I say if we can move our focus points around, because the performance of the focus points on a lot of cameras away from the center goes down massively, and you need to be aware of this. The center focus point on your camera is really, really accurate and fast. The outer ones, less so. This varies from camera to camera massively. On the latest mirrorless cameras, this isn't going to be an option. But if you own an older camera, it's something you need to think about. You should go online and look about your camera and find out about the types of focus points that it has. For instance, this camera is a 5D Mark II. It has outer focus points, but they're really only usable for people that are standing still, for instance, for a portrait. And even then, they're not all that accurate. If you mix into that low light conditions and a moving subject, it doesn't really work, and it's not something I'd rely on. Now, if you move that to the 5D Mark III, the 5D Mark III has a lot more focus points. And in the menu system, you can cut that down to the ones that are just cross-type. Now, cross-type focus points are much more accurate. And you don't then get as many, but you're only selecting from the better focus points. Each camera has a different type of focus point layout. For instance, on the Nikon D750, the focus points, the good ones, are more clustered in the middle and more vertically. And the outside ones aren't as good as, say, they are on the 5D Mark III. But they're good enough. When we're looking at the type of method of focusing we're going to use, we need to take into account the capability of our camera to use different focus points, the depth of field that we're going to be shooting at, and our own preference about what's the best way to do it. It can be very difficult to just keep moving your focus points around. Depending on how you think and the camera that you've got, like how many steps do you need to move the focus point over to the side? If it's like you keep having to tap it, tap, 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 and then want to get back over to the other side and it's tap, 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 tap. It's a long time in between. In some instances, it can be better if you just get, let's say I'm using this camera. For this camera, I would use probably single shot, not tracking, and just the center focus point. And there's always, when you simplify things, there's a beauty in simplicity, because you only have one thing to do, which is focus, recompose, shoot, focus, recompose, and shoot. The other thing that we have to take into account as well is that where to focus. If you're going to track someone's head, or if you're going to focus and recompose or single shot on someone's head, when they're walking down the aisle, that can be a little bit difficult to do if you're trying to grab different compositions. So one thing that I use is that if you see the way people's faces are, the eyes are recessed into the face. Someone's stomach area is relatively in line with their eyes. So what I do when the bride's coming down the aisle is I don't focus on her face. I tend to focus on the body. And that means that placing my focus point, I'm not looking for a smaller target. I've got a bigger target to work on, which makes it much easier for me when I'm focusing on someone coming down the aisle. If you're going to track that person, it's also easier for the tracking. You can just put it over them. What you have to watch though is how they're carrying their flowers, what their arm position is. If their arms are in front of them, then you can't do that, and you end up having to go back to the face again. So it just depends on how the person's walking. But if I can, I like to focus on the stomach area because it gives me a larger target area than just trying to hit that head. When it comes to tracking or not tracking, the real consideration is just to understand that blend of the aperture that you're using, which gives you your depth of field, versus the camera's performance and how you want to shoot. So if I were to use a 70 to 200 at f4, it's very easy for me to use single shot, focus and recompose. And I feel that, for me personally, that's what I like to do, because I feel that with that method, I can very simply get lots of different compositions and framing without having to change anything. I am literally just working my focus and shoot, focus and shoot, focus and shoot. That's it. And just getting my different framing and different compositions. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. So if you're going to go for a wide aperture, you're going to need to track, and your camera has to be capable of it. If you're going to use a smaller aperture, you can pretty much get away with either. And then it comes down to preference. That's the bottom line. Yeah. Okay. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, let me know, and subscribe, like, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.